Abstracts are a bit like the blurbs on the back of books, but with spoilers. They're about a paragraph long, and they're summaries of a work that is going to be presented or has been presented. So this could be a paper, this can be a conference talk or a conference poster, and the abstract gives people a sense of what you did and why, and what you found and what that means. So basically, those are the key things that you would want to include in an abstract. And you have to fit this all in a short amount of text. It's really important to write a good abstract because this is often all that people are going to read. And so it's what they use to decide if they're going to go read or view or listen to that longer work. And sometimes it's all people can see because maybe they don't have access to the paper, but they can still, through like PubMed and stuff, you get access to all the abstracts. If you're not at a conference, often these conferences still publish the abstract books or the abstracts that were presented at the meeting, even if you can't see the thing itself. So the abstract is going to be seen by a wider audience than how many people actually see the actual work. So you want to make sure that your abstract is conveying everything that you want, nothing more, nothing less, and that you're making the most use of every single word in your abstract. So here is some advice for writing an awesome abstract.
So an abstract is typically about 150 to 250 words, so about 6 to 7 sentences, and I'll get into. You want to make sure that you're checking the specific instructions that you are given to make sure that you're within the word limit. And you want to include about 1 to 2 sentences of each of the following components. You have some sort of introduction. So what's the context or the background that you are working with? What do people need to know in order to be able to make sense of what you're about to tell them? The amount of context or background is also going to depend on what the audience is and whether you're doing this abstract for a more specialized or a more generalized audience. In your introduction, you want to highlight the question or problem. What was your work addressing? What was already known? What was missing? And why is it important that you find out? Then you have methods. So what did you actually use in order to do this? You don't have to get really specific in the methods, but a broad overview of the methods that you use. Then you have results. What did you find? When we talk about results that we'll get into, we're not talking about like putting in individual data points, but instead your key findings. If people want the actual data, well, that's what the paper's for, or whatever the other, however you're presenting your results are for. And then your conclusion and your significance. So why does it matter? But don't overgeneralize, don't overinterpret. People don't have the evidence, all of the evidence from just the abstract. So you want to make sure that you're not making these broad conclusions that your data don't support, but they're more just your theories. And we'll get much more into these different things. This is just a broad overview. So for example, a common place where you'll find abstract is if you do a search on like PubMed, or if you do a Google search and it takes you to PubMed. And so here, this is just trending articles, and you'll see that these are some of the trending articles, things that are popular right now. And if you were to click on one of these, it would show you the abstract for that article. And you can see that in these abstracts, they start off, they have some background. So some people are more attracted to mosquitoes, but the mechanism is not understood. And so there's your background. You have, okay, well, what's already known, what is missing, and then what methods they went about. They tested mosquito attraction and chemical analysis. What did they find? They found that mosquitoes with lacking these receptors were impaired in attraction. And then what's their conclusion and their significance? This link suggests that these compounds contribute to differential mosquito attraction. And why is this important? And understanding why humans are more attractive to others provides insights into what skin odorants are most important to the mosquito and can inform the development of more effective repellents. So you can see that they include all of those different components. And now if people think, oh, that sounds like it's cool. Okay, well now I can go and I can find the full text of it. And you can then search for different topics. And as we'll get into, you're going to want to make sure that when you're doing an abstract, you have keywords in your title and in the body of the abstract, so that when people go and search, basically a keyword is just what someone might, what you would want somebody to come across. You would want someone to come across your article if they were searching for one of these words. And so, well, I mean, you might want them to come across your article if they're searching for anything, but that's not what it means by a keyword. Instead, it's what someone that was actually looking for your article or a similar article would find. And so maybe if they did like mosquito attraction or something like that, that would come up. You can also see that, so like with these search results and things, they often have keywords here that the authors define, but then you have things that are going to help the search engine just if people were searching across it. And so you can see that for each of these different articles, you'll see an abstract, and this reading abstracts of different papers is a really great way to get experience and get ideas about what does and doesn't work well. And you'll want to make sure that you're reading abstracts from the specific paper or the specific conference if they have published abstracts from past meetings, to make sure that you are you'll fit in and that you're doing things as is expected. But yeah, so check out PubMed if you want to find examples, and you can just search for any topic and find papers on that topic. If you want to look at a certain journal or paper or etc., then you can just go to that journal or that conference's website. So say now it's time for you to write your own abstract. Yay! Okay. So what is some advice to follow? This is some advice from Dr. Alexander Newton, president of the IUBMB. And these are what I call Newton's concrete laws for abstract writing. So first, you want to have a clear, concise title. And so the title is often, people might, if I say more people read the abstract than read the paper or go to the poster, well, it's even more true that more people read the title than read the abstract than read the real thing. So you want to make sure that your title is going to tell them what they need to know. Often if the title is too broad, they might just not even realize what the thing is about or not care to look enough. They don't realize that what the really cool stuff actually is. But you also don't want your abstract title to be super duper long and unwieldy to give them all the information. Instead, you want your title to basically be concise, and then if they want more, they can read the abstract. So it should be not too descriptive, but not too vague. And so look at examples to see. Okay, so then you want to use 2 sentences or fewer to introduce the background and significance. By the 3rd sentence, you should be saying exactly what the point of your study is, and then you should have a concluding sentence, so don't leave them hanging. And then where applicable, such as for conference abstracts, reference how the work was funded. This is more of an issue for the conference abstracts when you're dealing with a paper and thing. There's often a special place in the paper at the end of the paper where this information gets put, but not so much for the conference abstracts. And so it's important that you put your reference, your funding sources there. And then my addendum is to get excited, because it's excited that you have work that you're going to present. So even if writing the abstract seems scary, it's still awesome, because that means you have work to present and you're going to get to tell people about your work, which is super duper awesome. Also, when it comes to abstracts, so if it's going to be like a poster presentation at a conference, this is going to be, it's totally okay that your work is in progress, and this is totally expected. And that's one of the great reasons reasons to present work at like a poster session, is you can present this work in progress and get feedback and ideas that might help you push it to the finish line. Well, there's no real finish line of research. There's always more experiments that you could do, but get it to the point where you can actually do it in like a real publication. Okay, So before we get too into advice, I want to also just mention that some journals and conferences or whatever are going to have very specific guidelines. There's this thing called a structured abstract, where the individual parts are explicitly laid out in separate sections, such as objective, methods, results, and conclusions. You see this a lot with like medical journals, not so much with the just general science journals, things like Nature, Cell, eLife, Science, all of these various things. We typically have unstructured abstracts where it's more just like a summary paragraph. But if they require a structured abstract, then you'll want to use a structured abstract. If they don't specify, then you probably don't want to. Okay, so what problems can you avoid? You don't want to include a ton of details, so the abstract is not the place for this. The detail should be in the thing that the abstract is for. And so typically if you find yourself putting in raw data and stuff, step back. I've seen a lot. This is one of the most common problems I see with abstracts, is that people put a ton of detail in there. And this has a number of problems, one of which is that then you don't have time for anything else. And so you don't have time for the background, you don't have time for the interpretation of the methods. And therefore the people don't really, you're not giving them the overall picture of your work. You're just spitting some data out at them, which isn't very helpful. And it can turn people away from actually going to view the real thing. And it can just kind of, yeah, you just look and you see a bunch of numbers and you kind of get turned off. So not that numbers are bad, numbers are really good in the actual work. That's really important, but the place for it is not in the abstract. Another common problem to avoid is using field-specific jargon. So the audience for the abstract is going to be a bit broader than the audience that ultimately views the whole thing, and you want them to be able to get the gist. And so although you want your abstract to be tailored, to the audience, not quite the audience that is actually going to be specifically reading your paper generally, but a little bit higher up. So it would be anybody who was actually reading that journal, or anybody who was actually at that conference, but not necessarily anybody who was at that sub meeting of the conference, or anybody who like the little subgroups, or anybody who actually went and read that article. So for example, if you go to the Nature journal, there's going to be some cell biology, there's going to be some biochemistry, there's going to be some genetics and genomics. And so some of those articles are going to be very, very specialized, and it'll be hard to interpret from an outsider. But an outside, or like someone outside of the actual field who might be still reading the Nature journal. And so, but those people might be reading the abstracts. And so you want those people to be able to understand things. But so you want basically you want to avoid the super specific stuff. That could be in your paper, but in your paper, you're going to have more context, you're going to have more room for background, and you're going to have citations that people can go to so that they can get caught up on all that lingo if they're unfamiliar with it. Whereas you don't have room for all of that stuff in your abstract, so you want to leave out this field-specific jargon. Similarly, you don't want to use abbreviations, especially in the title. So this is except for things like DNA, RNA, etc., that are basically generally accepted as common knowledge these days. Now, if you look at older papers, you'll see that before DNA and RNA were common terms, then they were actually spelled out. But then they become common knowledge, and you can leave them out and just use the abbreviation. In addition to not wanting to like confuse people and things, when you use acronyms or abbreviations, you only have like a paragraph of text. And so if you're using a bunch of abbreviations, it can get really just like alphabet soupy. And since you just have a paragraph, you're not going to be using the term that many times, so you can just spell it out. Okay, so typically you don't include citations in the abstract. There are some exceptions, such as if you're specifically building upon like a previous work. But typically you don't want to include citations in the abstract. You also do not want to use any unnecessary words. you have really limited space and you want to make sure each word matters. You want to make sure you're using formal length. You also do not want to use any unnecessary words. You have really limited space, and so you want to make each word matter. You need to use formal scientific language, but don't just include words to sound smart. So often in science, there's this tendency to try to kind of add long words and things when we could use shorter words, or to add basically sort of descriptive words, or I don't know how to explain it, but you kind of know it when you see it. There's a bunch of words that aren't really necessary, but people might include, especially when we're training scientists and we're trying to sound smart, but we don't feel smart. We can include these extraneous errors, these words that we don't need, and those are just going to add bulk to the text and leave it so that we have less words that actually do matter. So try to avoid using those sorts of things, but know that it can be really hard. This is something I struggle with because I'm typically so informal in my blog posts and things like this. And then when it comes to actually doing formal writing, I sometimes overcompensate and use too much, or undercompensate and don't use enough. So it's definitely something that I've struggled with, but hopefully you'll have an easier time. Okay, you also do not want to overinterpret your results. So as I mentioned, one of the things in your abstract should be your kind of like conclusions, your significance, implications. But you want to make sure that you aren't giving your readers a false impression. If something is just your theory, you want to make sure that that's clear, and that you're not just giving a theory that's totally unsupported by the evidence. So people are often only going to be reading that abstract, and so if you give them an interpretation that isn't totally supported by the facts, or something that's more of just an idea rather than a firm conclusion, then that can make it so that they have a false impression. This can get picked up by the media. There's all sorts of problems. And so make sure that you're not over-interpreting in your abstract. In your paper, there's more room in your conclusion section and things like this to kind of be more speculative, making clear that you're being speculative, but within the bounds of the research limits. So you have to be really careful about drawing conclusions and significance in your abstracts. You should have some, but it should be things that are well supported and make clear what is and isn't like fact. So to summarize these common problems to avoid, so you do not want to include a ton of details, do not include field-specific jargon, don't use abbreviations, don't use citations, don't use unnecessary words, and don't overinterpret your results. So that's a lot of don'ts, but what should you do? So to achieve some awesome abstracts, you do want to read those instructions and follow any specific guidelines. So I mentioned before how there are sometimes you need to do like a structured abstract. There are also going to be guidelines on word counts and things like this. So make sure that you follow those specific instructions for whatever you're submitting to. Speaking of what you're submitting to, you want to read examples from that place, so from that journal, from that conference, to make sure you get a sense of what's expected and make sure yours fits in. Reading examples is also a really great idea to get ideas about what does and doesn't work well. So this doesn't have to be specifically abstracts from that journal or from that conference, just abstracts in general. This will give you a really good sense, and you might read an abstract and be like, oh, yeah, that was a great abstract, or that was not a great abstract, and then try to figure out what made it great or what made it not great, and try to use that information when you're writing your own. Also, so another thing that you should do is to use transition words. So you have a very short amount of space, and you have a number of things that you need to fit in there. So although you want to avoid unnecessary words, a necessary word would be a transition word between the different sections. So it's just like a word. It's not going to add that much, but it's going to help the readers follow your thinking and go with the flow. So it'll help them see what was known, what was missing, what you did, what you found, and what that means. Okay, as I mentioned before, you also want to make sure that you're including keywords in the title and throughout the abstract. So don't just write like a catchy title. Your title should actually have the keywords that you would want people to find your article with if you were to search for those terms, and then those terms should also be in the body of the abstract. This is going to help search engines classify it, help people find it, help people know if they come across the abstract, whether they want to read your paper, etc. You also want to make sure that you're proofreading. So another common problem is that people have a bunch of typos throughout. So you want to make sure that you're carefully proofreading it and asking your colleagues for feedback. It can be hard when you've looked over something over and over and over to find those typos, and it can be hard when you're so in the weeds and like you know your project so well that you know all of those things that aren't in your abstract that make it easier for you to interpret your abstract, but still somebody outside without that knowledge of all the specific details might not be able to interpret your results and interpret your abstract. So you want to get an outsider's perspective. It's also good to get an outsider's perspective and feedback in terms of the style of the abstract. So ask colleagues for feedback on your abstract before you actually submit it. And take their constructive criticism as a learning opportunity. Don't take it personally. Writing abstracts well takes a lot of practice, and their constructive criticism is going to be really helpful to help you make sure that you are getting better as you're writing more abstracts, and to give your abstract the best chance of being seen well by the people who read it. So to summarize what you should be doing, you do want to make sure that you're reading those instructions and follow any specific guidelines. Read examples, use transition words, use keywords, and proofread and ask for feedback. And of course, get excited. So hope that helps you understand what abstracts are. So they're basically just these summaries of a person's work, either something that's published as a paper or something that's going to be presented as a poster or a talk. And these are often available for anybody to see, not just the people who have access to the journal articles or the people who have access to the conference. So it's going to be seen by a broader audience. You want to make sure that you're giving them a good summary of your work, not over-interpreting, but giving them the gist of what you did and why, and what you found and why that matters. And so hope that helps you understand and abstracts and write great ones.